guys, welcome to my channel. My name is ReadingBear and I hope you are ready for some more stories. And today, we'll take a look at some new entitled people content. If you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comment. And now, let's dive right into the stories.
The first story is titled, "Neighbor poured gasoline on my grass and set my front yard on fire because my grass was too long." Having great neighbors really makes you appreciate the neighborhood you live in. Except when you discover that your neighbor is not as friendly as you once thought he was. We will call my neighbor Mike. Mike moved in across the street about 4 years ago. I had never had any problems with him. As a matter of fact, he was actually pretty friendly. He would wave whenever he saw me, or my wife and daughter. Every now and then when my wife and I were outside gardening, he would come over and chat with us. It was mostly small talk, but we appreciated the friendliness of Mike. He was a little odd. He liked fire as we saw him burning his trash in his front yard several times. Although this was not an uncommon practice, where we lived, most people burned trash in their backyard, or had a special fire pit for it. Although, he never really bothered anyone, and he always was cautious of ashes and whatnot going towards other people's houses. He was odd, sure. But he seemed alright. Until one random day when he started complaining about my grass? See, my wife and I both worked full-time, while also raising our daughter. While our workload and schedules were mostly consistent, every now and then one of us would be locked away in our work office for a weekend or two. And that was the case a couple of months ago, except it was both of us. Our normal weekend routine consisted of doing some yard work and other stuff around the house. My 5-year-old daughter loved being outside, and the weather where we lived was pretty nice, so we spent a lot of time outdoors. Except, since both my wife and I were swamped with work, we had neglected our front yard a little bit. It was nothing crazy. The bushes and plants were not overgrown, but the grass itself was starting to look like it had received a hair transplant. Ha ha, you can laugh, it is okay. Well, one day when I got home from work, I was surprised to hear that while my wife was home, sometimes she worked from home instead of staying at her office all day, Mike from across the street came over to make some small talk. However, somewhere in his small talk, he had randomly asked my wife why we have not mowed on our front lawn. He did not seem aggressive about it at first, but it was still an unexpected question. I mean, my first thought was, why did Mike care about our grass? I thought he was just trying to make some small talk, but we would figure out soon enough that Mike was not at all the person we thought he was. As a matter of fact, he was quite dangerous. Both my wife and I continued to stay swamped in work for the next couple of weeks. We would have our free weekends back soon, and both of us were ecstatic. However, during these next couple of weeks, Mike began to act very strange. He stopped making small talk with us when he saw us leaving for the morning, and he did not even acknowledge us when we drove by. As a matter of fact, he was upset with us for some reason. My wife said one day when she waved to him in the morning, that he did not say anything and just gave her a dirty look instead. I thought back to what we could have done to upset Mike. Although, I was coming up blank because we were hardly home. The only thing I could think of was the comment he made, asking us when we were going to cut our grass. If I remember correctly, this was the last thing that I remember Mike saying to one of us. But for the love of God, he couldn't be upset about our grass, right? My wife had even told him we had been so busy with work and even joked we should hire a gardener. But guess what? Turns out that is what Mike was mad about. Remember how I mentioned my wife and I were excited we were going to start getting our free weekends back? Yes, no, did not happen. We would in fact, be spending the next several months dealing with police investigations, insurance agents, and lawyers. Because Mike had decided to light my ducking yard and house on fire. My wife was out picking us up some lunch, and I was getting ready to take my daughter outside as we were finally gone to get some yard work in. However, as I was approaching the backyard door, which was a sliding glass door, which I could see through, I could not help but notice the strong smell of smoke, like something was burning. Well, just a quick look through the glass door, and there was Mike with a ducking gas can and pack of matches. Immediately pick up my daughter and started to panic, if we're being quite honest. I mean, what the hell? Who has the balls to light someone's property on fire? In the middle of the day where everyone can see you? Mike must have saw me through the glass door because then got this crazy smirk on his face and shouted, That's what you get for not mowing your lawn. WTF? With my daughter in my arms, I immediately grabbed my phone and ran to my neighbor's house. Which could have been a bad idea because I did not know if Mike would follow me. Why would he? But also why would he light his neighbor's house on fire? But luckily my neighbor was already outside trying to investigate the smell of smoke. I had told her to call 911 while I call my wife and let her know what was happening. Well, upon the police and fire department arriving, half of the house was now engulfed in flames. Several of the neighbors were evacuated, and when my wife finally pulled up, she was absolutely devastated. Upon talking to the police, Mike actually had a lengthy criminal record. I was so shocked, I did not even know what to say. He had even served time for a voluntary manslaughter charge, as well as arson. This was the guy the first was living across all this time? Mike confessed everything to the police right then and there, knowing that he could not run from the fact he had a criminal record. My house, yard, and everything was destroyed. My daughter's tricycle was also destroyed in the fire, but luckily the neighborhood had come together and bought her a new one. We have been staying with a friend who also has a daughter our age while our house gets rebuilt and fixed. Let me tell you, dealing with insurance, police, and everyone else involved has not been fun at all. But in the end, we got our justice because Mike was found guilty on arson charges and is waiting for his sentencing. Who would have thought? The next story is titled, "So You Want Strict Adherence to the City Bylaws? You Got It Neighbor. TLDR. Call by law on me without having the common courtesy to talk to me first?" Enjoy the daily 7 a.m. Monday to Friday fully by law compliant pressure washing sessions every day for the foreseeable future. This compliance is ongoing and will be for the foreseeable future. So, I pulled out my gas-powered pressure washer this past weekend for the first time in 3 years. Figured it was well past time to do some property cleanup. Started at 11 a.m. on Saturday morning as I didn't want to start too early out of respect for my neighbors. Knocked off around 4 with a couple of breaks in between. Got the back and both sides of the house done. Lot of concrete patios. Figured I can finish the front driveway and retaining wall next day. Fired it up on Sunday at 11 a.m. and got to work for an hour so, broke for lunch, then back at it at 1. Maybe an hour or so later I'm interrupted by the city by law enforcement officer who is responding to a noise complaint. Apparently, there is a bylaw that prohibits power equipment on Sundays. Okay, I had no idea. Just a warning, no ticket. The guy was actually very nice. I'm a bit annoyed my neighbors called by law on me without at least coming to talk to me first, but okay. At this point there is a huge mess all over the end of my driveway, the sidewalk in the street, so I ask the officer is it okay if I quickly take 5 minutes to clean the mess up and push it all together. He says, sure, no problem, and I quickly start cleaning up. Cue not one but two of my old geezer neighbors to come running out of theirs houses to attack the poor by law kid. A minute later he comes back and says, sorry, you need to shut down now. Okay, he is just doing his job, but now I'm pissed. I've lived here for 8 years and none of these old a-holes have ever even said hello to me or my family. So, I get the details of the exact bylaw. Nothing on Sunday. Saturday 9 to 5, should have started earlier. Monday to Friday 7 to 7. As he is leaving, I call out very loudly to him, not really to him. So just so I'm clear, 7 a.m. Monday morning is an okay. Bright and early at the stroke of 7 a.m. Monday morning, I put an hour of pressure washing before work. Tuesday morning another bright and early start. Wednesday session was truly awesome. Who should stop by this morning while I was working on my retaining wall and sidewalk but my neighbor Baldy McBylaw Collar. I gave him a friendly wave and a neighborly good morning and continued with my work until I ran out of gas. He hung around for a while glaring unhappily at me but must have realized that there was really nothing he could do about the situation he had caused. He slunk away a few minutes later. I'm running out of things to pressure wash but my other neighbor has let me know I can borrow his grinder so I can finally get rid of that piece of rebar sticking out of the concrete at the side of my house. Sunday today and tomorrow is a holiday so I guess it will have to wait until Tuesday at 7 a.m. Update 1. Baldy McBylaw Collar came out this morning not very happy with me. I had to ask him several times to stay off my property and he actually said, "Or what are you going to hit me?" This fellow seems a little mentally unstable if he is trying to goad me into a fistfight. Turns out I had been looking at an old version of the bylaws and holidays are actually restricted. No idea why the city has multiple versions online. I spoke with by law about that and they are going to get it fixed with their IT department. So, I've shut down for today, which is unfortunate as I had quite a lot to do, but tomorrow awaits. The next story is titled, Don't Mess with My Uncle. My uncle is very much one of the coolest people I know. He crams every second of every day enjoying all that life has to offer, from safari trips to nature photography to beekeeping to tropical fish breeding, complete with custom aquarium building, and more. He's also the nicest guy you'll ever meet, willing to help anybody with anything at any time. One of his hobbies includes gardening, and he turned his giant backyard into a pollinator's paradise, with the flower beds enclosed by a small, short, white picket fence. The ones that are like 6 inches tall and used just to keep the garden contained, but they're more decorative than anything. Now, having done well for himself in his life, he also happens to live in a snooty, upper-class neighborhood with lots of trophy wife busybodies who can't mind their own business. As part of this snooty neighborhood, the HOA rules explicitly state, no fences. Of course, they mean large 6 to 10 feet tall fences around your property, not tiny fences around a garden bed. Either way, my uncle's neighbor decided to take it upon herself to report my uncle to the HOA for having a fence, and he got a letter from the HOA, since I guess their interpretation did find my uncle in the wrong. His response? To read the entire HOA bylaws to ensure that whirligigs, the lawn ornaments that looks like a bird with spinning wings that make an awful constant clacking noise, weren't prohibited. They weren't, so my uncle up and replaced all of his garden fencing with these whirligigs. Dozens, if not hundreds of them, clacking at all hours of the day and night. It was quite a racket. My uncle is a nice guy, so he took them all down at the end of the season. But I'm sure it humbled that awful neighbor of his. She never said anything to him or the HOA again, probably in fear of, worse, retaliation. Like wind chimes. The next story is titled, Call the Cops for You? Absolutely. Another shared story about someone asking for the cops to be called reminded me of this. Several years ago, we had some new neighbors move in, a man and a woman, renting, and they weren't exactly salt of the earth folks. There were obvious signs of drug and alcohol abuse, playing music so loud that our windows rattled in our house next door, mean dogs that escaped all the time, people over all the time, and parking in the road. You know the type. We tried to be polite but steered clear of them when possible. It was a crappy situation made worse only by the fact that the college kids that used to live there had moved out after years of neighborly bliss. Their parents actually still owned the house and I had already made a couple of calls to them about the disturbances. I guess it must have been about a year after they moved in when I was driving home from work and headed down our street in a direction where I was passing in front of their house. It was almost dark out and this was a small residential street with light traffic and the speed limit was maybe 25 or 30. The man of the house was out in the street stumbling around, yelling, flailing his hands, blocking cars as they were trying to get by. Obviously he was wasted. He kept screaming for somebody to call the cops. I managed to eke by him and park in my driveway. I watched for about 15 minutes as he continued this little show. I wanted to watch for any evidence that he was in any sort of jeopardy other than being in the street. So, I looked at my wife and said, you know what? He wants the cops, I'm going to oblige. And I picked up the phone and dialed 911 and told them there was a man in the street blocking traffic and asking for someone to call the police. About 5 minutes later, the city's finest roll up in 2 squad cars. We went out and sat on our front porch and watched them try and get this dude into the back seat for 20 minutes and ultimately, he was hogtied and thrown in on his stomach by the time they were done. I guess he didn't want the cops after all. We never saw him again, but a couple weeks later there was a new man of the house that had moved in. We sold and moved a few months after that but never saw that first guy again, so I have no idea what happened. I can only presume he had outstanding warrants and was locked up. The last story is titled, Your Grandpa Threw You into the Fire Pit? We Better Call the Cops. So, I am a psychologist and counselor with years of experience working on a child helpline. We would often get prank calls from bored children, and we always took it as a good sign, because at least they knew our number in case they ever needed it. Our policy was to treat prank calls as real calls because, well, you never know what could be true and just sound exaggerated. Usually, the prank call would end if we caught a kid in a lie and told them we were confused because a minute earlier they told us something different. Usually by that point the kid would start laughing or go quiet and end the call. But some of the kids were really dedicated to the stories they'd come up with and would call us out on it if they felt we weren't taking them seriously. For example, one kid called and told me his grandfather threw him into the fire pit, and I of course told him that worried me and asked if he could explain a bit more what happened. He proceeded to tell me that his grandpa threw him in there so that he could rise from the ashes a new man. I stifled a chuckle and calmly asked the child if he was maybe pranking the helpline, to which he got offended, so I proceeded to treat the call as a real one. And boy, was he dedicated. We spent 15 minutes talking about if he's in a safe spot now. Does he have anyone around him who could protect him or who he could trust to tell this to? What about grandma? What about the neighbors? He would come up with something for everything. He was safe now hiding in the forest. His grandpa hit his grandma with a frying pan. The neighbors couldn't be trusted because they were also scared of his grandpa, etc. So last card up my sleeve, I told him I was worried about his safety and that we can call the police to come get him and protect him. He proceeded to tell me that I shouldn't waste their time. He doesn't know where he is, so they couldn't possibly find him. I told him I could help them if he gave me his phone number so that the police could find his location. He hung up. For anybody worried that the story was true, he called a few days later with a new story about his sister burning his face with a hot pancake. Thanks for listening.